Hello, everyone. How are ya? Thanks for joining me once again. Hopefully, I'm sounding good. Let's double check, as per usual. Let's see how we're sounding. Thanks for joining me once again. Yep, sounding good, looking good. Let's share real quick and get a going. I can't believe it, you guys. We're almost halfway through this book. That's crazy. It is truly crazy. Okay, shared. Shared to the groups. Shared with you, my friends. Um, yeah, let's dive right in, shall we? Starting a couple minutes late here anyway. Get a little drink of water. Hope everybody's happy and healthy out there. Doing well. Looks like the stream is fairly stable. Once again, if you are watching and experience any stream issues of any kind, either video or audio, I am recording all of these readings on my computer. You can click on the link that's in the description for the video. Should be right there. I know Facebook kind of moves things around depending on how you're looking at it on your phone or on your computer, but should be there to just tap on a link that'll take you to the YouTube playlist. Right after I finish doing these streams, I immediately upload them right to YouTube, so any issues, should be able to check it out there. All right, we are doing chapter 23 and 24 today. Yes, and we just blasted off from Indikar. Our heroes are stowed away on a pirate ship of some kind and don't know where they're going, but at the very least, they're getting off the planet. Let's pick up where we left off. Chapter 23. But I'm hungry. Barry's whisper in response to an elbow in the ribs from Susie could hardly classify as such. It echoed down the ducting that surrounded the children. Getting caught had pretty quickly slid down a few notches on the hierarchy of their concerns, at least as far as the volume of Barry's voice would indicate. It had been somewhere between 6 and 7 hours, and neither the couple nor the pirate captain had emerged from their respective cabins. It was from the pirate captain's cabin, however, that the smells of cooked meat were now wafting, and Barry was about ready to mutiny. Susie and Clark had ventured back into the further recesses of the ducting system once the captain had engaged the star drive and lumbered into her cabin. Petrick and Barry had shimmied after the smaller, more adventuresome two, and a veritable palace was what they found. Each of the ducting junctures, of which there were several, was almost large enough for the children to stand completely upright, and the ducts crisscrossed through the ship, which meant that they could travel virtually anywhere they pleased, as long as they were able to keep quiet. That was the current issue, keeping quiet. All the tunnels in the world wouldn't matter if Barry couldn't keep his voice down. "They'll hear you," Susie hissed right back at him. "She's right, Barry," Petrick interjected, "and we cannot get caught." "Why not? They don't seem so bad." "Because they'd probably turn around and take us home," Susie said. "But they have food," Barry persisted. "We have Haber's ration bars in our packs. We can eat those." Barry harumphed and folded his arms, pouting. "Those things taste like Terran beetle dust," he said. Petrick had to give that point to Barry. He was right. They were pretty terrible. "It doesn't matter if that food smells like summer dumplings," said Susie. "This isn't the dining hall. We're stowaways on a pirate ship. We can't have any of it because we can't get ourselves caught." Barry threw his head back and groaned, which made Petrick wince. "Can we just crawl over and see what it looks like?" Barry offered. "No," Petrick said firmly. Petrick tossed Barry a ration bar to stifle any further protesting from his rotund companion. He opened it with a loud crinkle. Susie shot him another stink-eye look, and he stuck out his tongue back at her before, more quietly, opening his bar the rest of the way and taking a bite. He made a face at the taste, but he kept munching. Petrick ignored his own grumbling stomach and turned his attention back to the small pile of parts and wiring that he'd pilfered from the lab and slipped into his pack. He knew there was some way to modify the vocal projector he'd made once with his father so they could talk to each other from a 300-foot distance and reverse that effect, muffle the sound. A sound reducer could mask their hiding place, perhaps, and save them from Barry's mouth. But so far, it had been a dead end. An idea occurred to him, and he reached over for his pack to find a new power cell, and he noticed that Clark wasn't in the juncture with them. Surprised, Petrick half stood and looked around between their packs for the fluffy dog. Susie looked up. "Where is Clark?" Petrick asked. Barry shrugged his shoulders and took another painful bite from his substandard meal. "He was just here," Petrick said, beginning to look down the different ducting routes that met their hiding place. If he'd looked 2 seconds later, he would have missed Clark's pom-pom tail rounding the corner of the duct that led directly toward the pirate captain's cabin. "He's going after the food!" Petrick Whisper cried. Petrick scrambled into the duct tunnel, then immediately slowed to a crawl when he realized that any noise he might completely nullify. Oh, sorry. Let me read that again. Petrick scrambled into the duct tunnel, then immediately slowed to a crawl when he realized that any noise he made might completely nullify any attempt to stop Clark from being discovered. He glanced back and saw Susie and Barry crawling along behind him, motioning him for him to hurry up. The sides of the ducting were a type of fitted metal, and except for the sections that ran directly underneath the grated walkways, they were mostly clean. They also seemed to be molded directly into the walls of the ship, as opposed to thinly walled tubes hanging in open space. This was a good thing, considering they did a decent job of muffling movement. They rounded a corner, and Petrick nearly cried out involuntarily at the sight of his naughty dog. Clark was standing right beneath a grating that appeared to open up into the ship above from the telltale pool of light that poured down into the ducting. From the grunting sounds and the hiss of cooking oil, it was the personal cabin of the pirate captain. The trio instinctively froze at the sight and sound, but Petrick gathered his wits after a moment and continued crawling slowly toward Clark. He didn't dare call out to the dog, but he did try to get his attention by motioning with his hands and arms. Alas, Clark's attention was solely occupied by the same thing that had transfixed Barry a few moments earlier, the cooking food. As Petrick neared, he could see up through the grating to the underside of their dreaded pirate captain. She was standing at a small stove, the source of the delicious smell, and it was delicious. Petrick realized even his own mouth was watering. He had just about reached Clark's hind quarters when there was a sudden clanging sound that caused Petrick to freeze. It took him a moment to realize that it was coming from the pirate captain's door. The woman muttered to herself and waddled over grumpily. When it creaked open, it revealed Colossus standing in the doorway. The pirate captain grumbled, something along the lines of, "This had better be good," and the silver robot responded with a series of mechanical grinding sounds and clicks and beeps. Whatever he said, the pirate captain let out a frustrated sigh and walked over to her stove, turned it off, then strode out of sight after Colossus. Petrick could hardly believe their luck. He could grab Clark and retreat into the ducting, with no one being the wiser. His hope turned to despair, however, when his eye caught Clark's fluffy tail slipping through the grating and into the cabin. "How did he even open the grating?" Petrick muttered a quiet curse to himself, then scurried forward as fast as his arms and feet would take him. He glanced back at Susie and Barry for the briefest of moments before slipping himself through the grating. Their eyes were as wide as dinner plates. The grating opened at a side hinge without resistance. No wonder Clark had been able to get out so easily. Petrick stood and could see his dog, now up on the counter, prancing toward the skillet, where 4 strips of delectable-looking meat were sizzling. "Clark, stop!" Petrick whispered, as quietly and as loudly as he could all at the same time. It was too late. Petrick reached the naughty dog right as he slipped one of the strips into his mouth. He was chewing contentedly by the time Petrick had him snatched up into his arms. Petrick cursed again to himself. The woman was sure to notice that her 4 strips had magically become 3. He looked back at Barry and Susie, still inside the ducting, but now pressed up against the grating, watching the entire scene in silent horror. "What do we do?" he thought silently to them. He was answered by their attention even more horrifically, turning to something behind him. Petrick looked to see what it was. The pirate captain was standing in the doorway, her ruddy face covered in shock. The next few seconds were a blur. Petrick yelped in surprise, which startled Clark, who wiggled his way out of Petrick's grasp and onto the ship deck. The pirate captain lunged for Petrick, and he made a run for the grated opening. He got maybe 2 steps before the larger woman snagged him by the shirt collar and pulled him back. Petrick was thrashing on the ground when Clark sprang to the defense of his master by sinking his teeth into the captain's leg. The pirate captain bellowed, but did not let go of Petrick's collar. Suddenly, Susie and Barry were in the room, trying to yank loose the woman's grasp, which they were able to do after a moment. But that was right when she was able to fling Clark free and dive on top of all 3 of them, knocking them into a screaming heap of arms and torsos and elbows on the rough deck of the ship. Somehow, Petrick managed to extricate himself from the pile, and he made a break for the cabin's open doorway. As he did, he ran right into the cold, hard metal of the giant gleaming android Colossus. Petrick yelled out at the top of his lungs, and as the robot lifted him by an armpit right off the deck. Clark, somehow still free, attacked the robot's legs with as much ferocity as his little body contained, but the robot didn't even flinch. Instead, he stooped and with his one free arm snagged the attacking furry ball by a leg. Petrick's blood ran cold when Clark squealed in pain. "Let him go!" he screamed at the top of his lungs, and he threw his fists and feet and elbows and knees as hard and as fast as he could against the cold metal that held him. "You let him go! Let him go! Let him go!" "Colossus!" bellowed another voice with much more authority in it. "Cease!" It took Petrick a moment to realize that the command had come from the pirate captain. He swiveled his head around to see her standing, disheveled from the fracas, holding Barry and Susie each by their collar. Colossus had turned his own head to gaze at his master, and Clark had changed his cries of pain to small whimpers. "Do not harm them," the pirate captain growled, trailing off. She took a purposeful step forward, dragging Barry and Susie with her and motioning for Colossus to follow her. "Yet." "Stowaways!" the woman bellowed. "By all rights and the Starfarer's creed, I should put the lot of you straight out the airlock." Now that they were face to face with their captor for the first time, the 3 children could see she was not exceptionally tall. She still managed to maintain quite an imposing presence. She was broad, almost rotund, and perpetually unkempt. She constantly squinted, as if nearly everything needed close consideration, and it left her with deep scowl lines above her ruddy nose and on her leathery forehead, and she stank quite profusely. Susie had wrinkled her nose, which the woman quickly took exception to. Wipe that look off your face, little girl," she flung at her. She was pacing back and forth in the small room that she had hauled them into. It appeared to be some sort of closet. Various bits of gears and piping and wires were strewn about, and there was a mess of cleaning supplies in one corner. Obviously, they hadn't been used in quite some time. Colossus stood ominously in the doorway, as did the passenger couple, who must have heard the shouting from their discovery. "Surely," said the man in the doorway, "you can't possibly be considering the airlock." "What I'm considering is none of your business, Dedrin," the captain answered, using the man's name. "You and Aris are passengers on my ship." "Captain," said Petrick, stepping forward. Susie tried to pull him back and shut his mouth, but she was too late. Barry nearly soiled his pants when the captain stopped pacing and looked challengingly right at Petrick. "What's your name, Captain?" The woman rolled her tongue in her cheek. It was impossible to tell if she was impressed that Petrick was speaking up or enraged. "You can call me Balta," she replied. "Captain Balta, of the mining transport ship Red Robert." Petrick gulped. "Captain Balta," he said, "we apologize for our subterfuge." "No fancy words for it," Balta cut him off. "Stowaways, that's what you are." We apologize for stowing away, but, you see, it was our only option. We had to get off Indikar, desperately, and you were the only ship. Balta put her hand up to stop him. I don't care, she said. Starfarer's creed says that anyone who travels pays their way. Anyone who doesn't gets tossed overboard. We don't have anything to pay you with, Barry said, sounding dangerously close to tears. Then you go overboard, Balta snapped back. Captain, Dedrin said, speaking up again, surely we can just take them back to Indikar. No, Petrick pleaded. You don't understand. It's very, very important that we get to the Outer Rim. It doesn't matter where you want to go, boy, if you can't pay your way. Please don't hurt them, Aris, the Indikaran woman, pleaded. Balta took a step toward them, and Susie screeched with all her might. The sound was vicious, piercing, and almost impossibly loud. Petrick realized she was mimicking the sound a Vreen made. It freaked out Barry so much that he burst into tears. Balta stopped and looked at the three children uncertainly. Apparently, she wasn't used to her prisoners screeching or crying on her. The scowl on her face lessened, and after a moment she threw her hands up in the air. Oh, stop it, for stuff's sake, she said. I'm not going to throw you out the bloody airlock. Barry's cries turned into sniffles, but Balta still wrung her hands uncomfortably. No need to get all weepy now, she said. Then the scowl returned to her face. But no amount of crying, or whatever that was, she pointed at Susie, is getting you to stay on this ship. Barry looked like he would start crying again, but Balta shot a halting hand up to nip it in the bud. Ah, she said, I said no more. I may not be putting you out into the vacuum, like you deserve, but we absolutely are stars to rights turning tail around and dropping you right back on Indikar where you belong. There were protests again from the children, but Balta stomped her feet to silence them. Enough, she said. I am the captain of this ship. Children, said Eris, surely your parents will be missing you. We don't have parents, lady, Susie said. We're from Childers' Home for the Parentless, Barry confirmed. Nobody's missing us. Orphans? Eris sounded odd, asking the question. I have parents, Petrick said. Everyone turned to look at him. A father, I mean. He has dreams about him, Barry asserted. That's why we left Indikar. We're going to save him. Balta snorted at the notion. Thank you, Captain, Dedrin said. I'd like to think you'd be more concerned about making your transport, separatists, Balta said, and glanced at Colossus as if checking the time. We'll be cutting it mighty close if we try to backtrack and still make it to the wall. You're going to the wall? Petrick leaped up. That's where we need to go. Everyone goes through the wall if you're headed to the Outer Rim, Balta said, as if that were a fact everyone already knew. Not that it's anything to you, scallywag, because you're going home. With that, she turned and stomped out of the room, Colossus lumbering after her. Captain, wait! Petrick called after her, but Balta didn't stop. So Petrick, and then Barry and Susie, and Clark, followed closely by Dedrin and Eris, all set off as a protesting mob after Balta and Colossus as they headed toward the cockpit. Perhaps, said Dedrin, perhaps we shouldn't return to Indikar. We cannot miss our transport. Reaching the small doorway that led into the four-seated control room, Balta turned and slapped a hand against the door, silencing the grumbling mob. This is not up for debate. She jabbed a fat finger at the couple. You two will arrive on time, as promised. She jabbed another finger at Petrick, Susie, and Barry, and Clark. You lot are going home, and that is final. She then turned around and harumphed herself into the forwardmost of the cockpit chairs. Balta's finger jabbing continued, now punishing the many flickering lights on her control panel. Moments later, Petrick could feel the Red Robert shudder, and the projected display that lit up over the wider viewport showed their relative velocity slowing. Petrick craned to see outside the ship, but it was mostly darkness. Back! Balta snapped at him without turning around. Don't touch anything. We're only going to be here long enough to turn around. The entire group jumped, Balta included, when an alarm suddenly screamed at them. The pirate captain frowned and wheeled her overstuffed chair to another console. Turn it off, she commanded Colossus. The alarm silenced. What did that sound mean? Dedrid asked from the doorway. Colossus garbled some mechanical noises at Balta, and she yelled back, "From where?" Colossus clicked and creaked a response. Balta whirled to her passengers. "You didn't double book passage, did you?" Dedrin and Eris frowned at Balta, then at each other. No, stammered Darren. "Of course not." "Are you spies?" "Captain, you were the only one to make contact with our village," Dedrin asserted. "Then how do you explain this?" Balta pointed to a small, grimy readout that showed a bouncing waveform lit up in greens, yellows, and reds. "That's a transmission," Petrick said. "From Indikar." "How do you know that, kid?" Balta's eyes were now boring into Petrick, narrowed in their signature manner. "I learned to recognize them from my dad." "I thought all you separatists were terrified of technology." "Hey, it's none of your business," said Susie. "It is if you little bastards get us caught," Balta said. "We just know stuff, okay, ma'am?" Barry was doing his best Susie impression. Chest puffed, chin high. "Except what that transmission is. Don't know anything about that." "Who's transmitting?" Petrick asked. Balta turned back around, apparently satisfied for now, and began scanning her console again for more information. "Only one kind of ship would be beaming broad range like that," she said. A moment later, she leaned back in her chair and rubbed her face. A small dot was depicted on the display projected over the cockpit window. "I knew it. That's an Authority scout ship," she said. "On Indikar." "The Authority?" Dedrin repeated. He was whispering. "Why are they transmitting to us?" Petrick asked. "They're not," Balta answered. "They're transmitting to that." She pointed at another small dot projected onto the center of the window. What the dot represented was indistinguishable, but with a gesture, Balta enlarged it. A gigantic, blade-shaped ship leaped into view, bristling with armaments on every side and gleaming a pearl-white color from nose to stern. A menacing sight to behold, even in holographic form. It sliced through space like a knife. "That is an Authority capital ship," Balta said, "which means we're spaced." "How?" said Dedrin. Petrick noticed Aris slide closer to her husband and squeeze his hand. "We're not due for another 3 months." "They changed their schedule?" Balta said, and she buried her face in her hands. "Or it's just dumb luck. Unbelievable." "We must run," Aris said. "No point." Balta shook her head. All her bravado was gone. It was far, far scarier than any yelling or blustering. "They're too close." A new alarm blared to underscore her point. A proximity alert. Petrick surmised from the countdown that appeared on the window display. "You can't let them take us," Dedrin yelled. "There's nothing I can do," Balta answered. "They're going to take all of us." Everyone stared at the ship, which grew closer, and the countdown beneath it. 5 seconds. 4. Petrick wondered what 2 Indikarans from the northern province could be running from. 3. Where were they going? 2. 1. 0. Gonna take a quick sip here. Chapter 24. Nothing. The entire cabin had been collectively holding its breath for what seemed like hours. Petrick looked up at the cockpit display. Where the capital ship had dominated their view, the holographic overlay showed nothing ahead of them but stars. "They flew right past us," Balta said finally, disbelievingly. She double-checked her instruments. "They're already 2 light years behind us, and receding." Eris whooped in exultation, and Dedrin hugged her tightly. "Oh my, Indikar is with us," she said. "Something is," Balta said, still trying to figure it out. "I mean, any active scan would have picked us up from 50 light years out." "Maybe whatever's on Indikar was more important than one lousy ship," Susie said. "Watch what you say about my ship," Balta said half-heartedly. "And you must be right." "Well," Petrick said, "then surely we can't turn around." "That much is for certain," Dedrin agreed. Balta groaned and shot them both a look. Does that mean we get to stay? Susie asked, arms folded. I'm only staying if she's nice, said Barry, pointing at Balta. Balta put her head back in her hands and remained in that position for a good long while. Finally, she cracked her fingers open and looked at the children. You're gonna pull your weight, that's for sure, she protested to them, starting with remaking my breakfast, which that mutt ruined. She jabbed a finger in Clark's direction. Clark growled softly. Oh, you should let Habersham do the cooking, Barry said. Haber's much better at it than we. His words trailed off, and silence hung in the air for a single second before all three children turned and gaped at each other with sudden realization. Haber! Haber had been frozen solid in just the few hours that the Red Robert had been in flight. Balta, after pitching a brand new fit that another stowaway had gotten himself on board, recruited Colossus to go to the cargo hold airlock and find the other synthetic. As the scary silver robot hauled Haber into the warm confines of the crew decks, Petrick almost yelled out for joy and cried at the same time. There was a pit in the middle of his stomach that he hadn't even known was there, and it started to ebb. Petrick realized he hadn't really been sure Haber would stick with them, given the opportunity to leave. It also made Petrick register how much he wanted Haber to stay. The excitement waned when he saw how utterly frozen over and unresponsive their friend was, but Balta grunted and poked about, saying that the android would be fine as soon as he thawed. She had Colossus place him on the ground, which the robot did with surprising care. I've never seen a unit quite like this, Balta said, wiping melting ice from Haber's inert face. My dad made him, Petrick offered. Maybe that's why. He looks very human. Not much use in spending time on all that, though, making them look human. Better to just make them look big and strong, like Colossus. Looks are useless. Oh, Haber is very useful, Barry interjected. He's the smartest android I know. Barry, Susie said, Haber's the only android we know. It's still true, Barry harumphed. He is the smartest. It occurred to Petrick that everyone was squabbling, perhaps even more than normal, because they still had not eaten any food. His stomach growled back at him, underscoring the thought. Balta seemed to finish her wiping and poking, and she repositioned herself in front of Haber. Okay, she said, searching with her eyes. Now, where would the reset button be? She seemed to land on a possibility, and was reaching for it when Haber's arm suddenly shot out and snagged Balta's hand in mid-gesture. I'd appreciate if you'd refrain from poking me, ma'am. Haber's icy blue eyes were suddenly open, and he was looking reproachfully up at the sweaty captain. His grip on Balta's hand was firm enough that Colossus took several steps towards the two, looking menacing and ready to intervene. Petrick stepped in. Haber, he said, let go of Captain Balta. Haber's eyes flicked over to Petrick and Susie and Barry. Are you children in any danger? He asked, still holding Balta's hand. Let me go, android, Balta commanded. We're fine, Haber, said Susie. Just let her go. Haber looked at Petrick, and Petrick nodded in agreement. It's okay, he said. We had them go and get you from the cargo hold. After another moment of looking at Balta, then back at Petrick and Susie and Barry, Haber let go of Balta's hand. Balta stepped back, wringing it, and looked slightly white from the squeeze. That's quite a grip, she said. You and Colossus should try an arm wrestling match. Haber sat up in one swift moment and looked Colossus up and down. Unlikely, he said. How did you wake up, android? Balta asked. I didn't push your reset button. I don't have a reset button, Haber replied disdainfully. Unlike your crude metal companion behind you, I was designed for automatic revival after cold hibernation, along with a multitude of other functions that I'm sure would make your head spin. Balta frowned at the sass Haber was throwing at her, then turned to Petrick. Your friend has a mouth on him, she said. Makes me want to break it. You are welcome to try, Haber said. Haber, interjected Petrick. Be nice. Captain Balta is heading to the wall. She's going where we need to go. Haber tilted his head, as if it helped him to process that information. Then he reached his hands down to the deck grating, folded his legs, and vaulted himself into a standing position. He wiped his hands on his pant legs, and then offered one to Balta in greeting. Balta shook it warily. My name is Habisham Cornelius Franklin Windsor III, he said. I am a personal multi-service android. Petrick is my master. Thank you for allowing us onto your ship. I didn't allow you on my ship, android, Balta said, correcting him. You snuck on, and you'd be dropped right back on your stupid planet if it weren't for the fact that a capital ship just passed us on its way there. An Authority capital ship, Haber said. Biggest one I've ever seen, Balta nodded. No idea why it'd be heading to your backwater planet, but they were in a hurry. That hurry saved our behinds. Indeed, Haber said, looking like he was deep in thought. Whatever it was, however, he left it to silence. The kids tell me you're handy with a skillet, Balta said, breaking the moment. Do they? Haber said, looking over at the trio of kids. You're hands down better than anyone they ever had at Childers, Barry exclaimed. I told them kids they'd be pulling their weight around here, Balta said. That goes for you too, android. Fair is fair. Fair is fair, Haber said back to her. They all just stood there for a moment waiting. Well, said Haber, I assume you have mess facilities of some kind? Balta harumphed and waddled down the corridor toward the cabins. The rest of them followed. As they walked, Balta called back to Haber. Oh, and one more thing. On my ship, I'm your master. Don't you forget that. That's the end of chapter 24. All right, you guys. Yeah, we are halfway through the book. Thank you so much for joining. Hopefully the stream was pretty good today. I bumped up the resolution a little bit just for the recordings that I do. And it doesn't look like I can stream in one quality and record another, so hopefully this is all working okay. But thank you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope that you're enjoying the book. Again, if you didn't see it at the beginning of the broadcast, if there were any problems, or even if you haven't listened or watched the rest of the chapters, in the video comments, just click on the link to the YouTube, the YouTube link there, and it'll take you to the playlist that has every chapter that I've done, and it has full quality video that's not based off of my streaming connection here to Facebook. It's recorded directly onto my computer. So if there were any issues, you can just watch or listen over there. Again, thank you so much. I hope you're all staying safe and healthy out there. It's such a pleasure to be doing these every day. I know I say that every time, but it's true. And have a great weekend. I'm going to take the weekend off from doing the readings. So I won't see you guys over the weekend, but I'll be right back here, same time, same place on Monday. Yeah, and we'll pick up from where we left off with this new pirate captain. It is it is so much more challenging to do the voices, you guys, than I ever would have thought possible. So hopefully you're enjoying the voices. I will say I'm having a blast doing the voices, so I hope you guys are enjoying them. It is definitely more difficult than I thought it would be, though, particularly going back and forth, but I hope you like them. I hope they're different enough to kind of get a sense of who's talking when they're talking. I guess that's kind of the idea. But anyway, that's a blast. I'm having a blast doing that. I'm having a blast doing this whole thing overall. So thank you. Love you all. Stay safe and healthy. I'll see you guys on Monday. Goodbye.